The Mustang was so low the propeller was chewing the tops off pine trees. Snow-dusted trunks blurred past on either side. A frozen Belgian field rushed up ahead, then dropped away as the P-51 bounced over a hedgerow at nearly 400 miles an hour. In the cockpit, Major George Preddy had both hands welded to the stick and throttle, eyes locked on the single German fighter a few hundred yards in front of him. Christmas Day, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was still raging. German armor and infantry were pushing hard in the Ardennes. Overhead, their last reserves of fighter pilots were trying to keep American Jabos and Thunderbolts off their panzer columns. Preddy, commander of the 328th Fighter Squadron, 352nd Group, the blue-nosed bastards of Bodney, had already shot down 2 FW-190s and a BF-109. That morning, in the space of minutes, he was one of America's deadliest fighter pilots. 3 years of combat, hundreds of missions, dozens of kills. The Luftwaffe hadn't been able to stop him. Now chasing a lone BF-109 that was trying to escape at treetop height over Poitiers, Allied-held territory, he pushed his luck one more time. He knew he was below the safe flak line. He knew American anti-aircraft gunners all along the front were wired tight, trigger fingers itchy after days of being strafed by German yellow-nose fighters. He also knew one thing with bone-deep clarity. If that 109 got away, it would come back around and kill Americans on the ground. So he stayed on it. He rode the P-51, Cripes a mighty right down the German's neck, trimming for speed, sight picture steady on the Messerschmitt's tail. The 109 jinked, dipped over a frozen stream, then climbed a few dozen feet to clear a line of trees. Preddy followed. He never saw the muzzle flashes from the American guns ahead. The first 90mm shell hit just in front of the Mustang's nose. Explode. Ding in a dirty gray-white blossom. Shrapnel ripped through the aircraft in a heartbeat. The canopy shattered inward. Wind and glass and metal fragments filled the cockpit. Preddy flinched as something punched him in the forehead and chest. "Blue leader's hit!" someone shouted over the radio. The Mustang lurched, clipped a tree, and scythed into the snowy field beyond in a long, cartwheeling smear of wreckage. The BF-109 he'd been chasing vanished into the low cloud and lived to fight another day. The gunners who'd just pulled the lanyards on those guns cheered for a breathless second, before the truth worked its way back along the wire to their ears. The Germans hadn't killed him. The Luftwaffe hadn't killed him in North Africa, in Australia, over Germany. His own side had. 3 seconds of friendly fire over a battlefield that had turned the sky into a free fire zone had ended the career of America's top Mustang ace. To understand how that happened, you have to go back 4 years, back to a rejected kid with a crooked spine, and a doctor who told him he would never fly. August 1940, Greensboro, North Carolina. The recruiting office was crowded, hot, and smelled of ink, sweat, and cheap cigarettes. 21-year-old George Preddy Jr. walked in with an idea that had been building in his head since he'd first seen biplanes buzzing the county fair when he was a boy. He was going to be a Navy pilot. He wasn't much to look at for the part. 5'9", barely 125 pounds, dripping wet, thin even by Depression-era standards. A slight curve in his back that made him look a little like the wind had permanently pushed him forward. He handed over his forms, tried to stand as tall as he could while the Navy doctor put a stethoscope to his chest and tapped his back. The chest X-ray came up on the light board. The doctor frowned. "Curvature of the spine," he said. "Sorry, son. Not fit for naval flight training." Preddy left with a piece of paper that said rejected. He came back 2 weeks later. The doctors recognized him. Another exam. Another set of numbers on a form. This time, it was blood pressure. Too high, too much. "Try something else, son. Maybe ground crew." The United States Navy had just turned away the man who would become the deadliest P-51 pilot in history. The thought that they'd made a mistake didn't seem to occur to them. It occurred to George Preddy. He did not quit. In September 1940, he walked into a different office. This one had an Army Air Corps banner above the door. Different service, different doctors, different standards. He took the physical again: eyes, ears, blood pressure, X-ray. He passed. The Army said yes. He reported for flight training. December 12, 1941, 5 days after the wreckage from Pearl Harbor was still smoldering in Hawaii, Cadet George Preddy pinned on his pilot's wings. The war he'd seen coming in newspaper headlines was now very, very real. The Army Air Forces put him on a boat and sent him as far from Pearl Harbor as you could get while still fighting the same enemy. Australia. Darwin. The top end of nowhere. The Chapter 49th Fighter Group had been thrown into the defense of Northern Australia as fast as transport ships and logistics could manage. The Japanese had taken the Philippines, pushed into the Dutch East Indies, and were eyeing the long, vulnerable supply line between the United States and Australia. Darwin had already been hit hard by Japanese raids in early 1942. The scars were fresh. Preddy arrived in a world of rust-red dirt, razor sun, and P-41 Warhawks, parked in rough revetments. The P-40 wasn't the sleek later-war Mustang. It was a blunt-nosed, rugged fighter. Allison V1710 engine, thick wings, good in a dive, but outclimbed and outturned by the Japanese. A6M0. For 8 months, Preddy flew P-40s out of dusty strips, scrambled on warnings, and stared at the sky for gray-green dots that meant enemy. He tangled with Japanese fighters more than once. He put bullets into at least 2 zeros. He never got a confirmed kill. Some of that was the P-40. Some was lack of radar-directed intercepts. Some was the chaos of early war combat over the Pacific. Some of it was him. He was still learning what air combat really meant when you were in it, not just watching it from the ground. Then, on Bodney, July 12, 1942, the war almost ended for him in a way the Japanese had nothing to do with. They called it routine training, a patrol over Darwin with other P-40s, standard formation work. He never saw the other aircraft coming. One moment, blue sky and metal in rough order. The next, a flash of wing where no wing should be. The collision crushed his cockpit. Metal tore into his legs and shoulders. His world became tumbling sky, cockpit frames, and the smell of gasoline. His wingmen watched his P-40 spiral down trailing debris and smoke. It looked to any reasonable eye like a fatal accident. Preddy somehow got out before the end. The details are a mess of pain and half-memories. The yank of the harness, the blast of air, the canopy frame too close to his head as he tumbled free, the sickening lurch as the parachute opened in the hot northern air. He hit the ground broken but breathing. Doctors in an Australian hospital removed 17 pieces of metal from his body over the next weeks. Shrapnel, cockpit framing, bits of his own airplane. His legs were a ruin. His shoulders weren't much better. Most men after that would have been sent home. Flight status, terminated. Career, over. The Army disagreed. Or maybe he convinced them to disagree. 8 months of recovery and rehabilitation. Later, the paperwork came through. New orders. Not back to Darwin. Not to a training command. To England. July 1943. Bodney Airfield, Norfolk. New country. New aircraft. New war. The 352nd Fighter Group was flying. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Out of Bodney. Big, heavy radial-engined fighters. The P-47 was a brute. 850 cal machine guns, thick skin, a reputation for bringing men home with half the airplane shot away. But it burned fuel at a terrifying rate. 200 gallons an hour in combat, sometimes more. That meant the Thunderbolts could escort bombers only as far as the border of the Reich. Beyond that, the B-17s and B-24s had to go it alone for the last, ugliest part of every mission. The bomb run deep inside Germany. Luftwaffe fighters knew it. They waited inside that no-escort zone like wolves beyond the campfire. For months, Preddy flew P-47s and saw almost nothing. Mission after mission. Climb, rendezvous with bombers, escort as far as the fuel pencil on the chart allowed, then turn back, scanning empty sky. Meanwhile, inside Germany, other men got to grips with the enemy and either wrote their stories in victories or in falling wreckage. Preddy was going stale, impatient, restless. He didn't want to burn a war on the periphery. He wanted to be where the action was. On December 1st, 1943. Someone upstairs finally obliged. The 352nd was returning from escorting bombers over Solingen. Big steel town, big flak, the usual. On the way back, near the German border, they spotted it. A B-17 staggered alone, leaking fuel and smoke, a little lower than it should have been. Behind it, angling in like a shark, was a WWII Messerschmitt Bf-109. An experienced Luftwaffe pilot saw the same set of shapes and did his own math. One wounded bomber. No escorts in sight. Easy kill. Preddy saw opportunity. He dropped his P-47's nose and rolled into an attack. He closed fast. At the right moment, he filled his gun sight with Messerschmitt and open sky and squeezed the trigger. 8 Browning 50s chattered at once. In about 3 seconds, the 109 came apart. Pieces came off in panels. The engine separated from the fuselage. The canopy flew open and a small figure, maybe the pilot, maybe just debris, tumbled away. Preddy pulled up over the falling wreckage, heart hammering. 2 years and 2 months of combat flying. 1 confirmed kill. It wasn't luck now. It was done. It was real. He'd finally put a stamp in the column he'd been chasing since the Navy had told him no. The euphoria lasted all of a day. Then the war rolled on. In April 1944, something better than 1 kill rolled into his life. A new airplane. The one that would make his name a capital letter in every Mustang history ever written. The PAO. North American P-51D. The Mustang was what every fighter pilot secretly wanted, but hadn't had the nerve to ask for. Sleek, fast, long-legged. With external drop tanks, it could escort bombers all the way to Taipei, Berlin and back. It could dive like a stone, climb like smoke, and still have enough fuel to go looking for trouble on the way home. The Merlin engine up front, built under license by Packard, delivered over 1,400 horsepower with a sweet, vicious note that any ground crewman could identify blindfolded. It carried 6 50 cal guns in later variants. In the 352nd Cal's version, 4 guns per wing, about 1,600 rounds total. More than enough for a skilled marksman. Preddy fell in love with it the first time he strapped in. He named his P-51 after his old gambling exclamation from mess hall dice games. Cripes a mighty. Blue nose, clean lines. The kind of plane you dream about at 14 and swear doesn't really exist until you touch it. In a P-51, Preddy wasn't flying to the edge of the game. He was in the middle of it. On May 13, 1944, over Tan Neuber, Brandenburg, he shot down 2 Bf-109s. That made him an ace. From that point on, his curve bent upward hard. In air combat, there's a saying, the more you survive, the better you get. The better you get, the more you survive. Preddy had always been aggressive. The Mustang let him make full use of that. Most pilots waited for the enemy to make mistakes. Preddy made them. He'd attack from unexpected angles, diving out of cloud or sun, rolling through enemy formations and snatching shots in the split seconds their reflexes hesitated. He forced German pilots to deal with him at his terms, not theirs. By the end of July 1944, he had piled up victories at a rate that made the squadron clerk sigh every time he had to update the board. Then came August 6, 1944. The day that made him, officially, America's top Mustang ace. And the day that showed, very clearly, why Colonel John C. Meyer cleared a hungover Major Preddy to fly when common sense said ground him. August 5, 1944. Bodney Airfield, Norfolk. The 352nd got the word. Weather over Germany looked bad. No mission tomorrow. Relief turned quickly into celebration. War bond tour, parties, drinks. Pilots who lived on the knife's edge when airborne did what they always did on the ground. When someone said, no ops, they pulled the corks. Preddy joined in, hard. The details vary depending on who tells the story, but all agree on the basics. He drank until nearly dawn. Poker, laughter, too many refills. At some point, someone probably said something like, "You damn well earned it, George." He stumbled to a bunk for a couple of hours' sleep. At Euro 400, the mission board changed. The weather over the Reich had unexpectedly cleared. Hamburg was on. Full bomber escort. The operations officer faced a choice. Let one of his best killers sleep it off, or put him on the roster and trust that his hungover instincts were still better than most men sober. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, Preddy's squadron commander, knew his ghetto. He knew Preddy was in no condition a flight surgeon would approve. He also knew that if there were Germans up there, the man he wanted in the fight was the short, slight kid from Greensboro who'd refused to let the Navy decide what he was for. He cleared Preddy to fly. At 0630, with his head pounding and his stomach somewhere between rebellion and resignation, George climbed into Cripes Mighty on the Bodney line. Ground crew strapped him in. The Packard Merlin coughed, caught, and settled into that murderous purr. Hangover or not, once the wheels left the runway, he was home. By the end of that day, he'd run his tally to a number no P-51 pilot would ever surpass. And then, because war has a vicious sense of humor, less than 5 months later, when the Reich was on its knees, his luck would finally run out. Not at a German's hands, at his own sides. Christmas Eve, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge had torn a violent, unexpected blister in the Allied front. German panzers and Volksgrenadiers had smashed their way through parts of the Ardennes, catching American units off guard, overrunning towns whose names were now on every map in every HQ from London to Washington. Bastogne, Malmedy, St. Vith. The weather had been terrible. Low cloud, snow, ground fog. All the things a ground commander loves and a fighter pilot hates. German infantry and tanks moved under that shelter, relatively safe from the prying eyes and bombs of the 8th and 9th Air Forces. Allied anti-aircraft units had been shooting at Phantoms for days. Every engine overhead sounded like a German. On Christmas Day, the weather finally broke. Clear enough, cold enough, blue enough. The order went out. Get everything that can fly into the air. Bombers, Jabos, Thunderbolts, Mustangs. The 352nd was temporarily operating off an advanced field on the continent now, scrambling. G directly into the Bulge fight. Preddy led his squadron into the air that morning. The blue noses of their P-51s now streaked with mud from European dispersals instead of just English rain. The day started like a Christmas present for a man like him. German fighters, finally forced up in numbers over their own offensive, gave him targets. He did what he always did. Attacked. By mid-morning he had splashed 3 enemy aircraft. He was in the zone. Then came the call that would draw him toward the tree-choked valleys where his luck finally ran out. Blue leader. Bandits low over. Coordinates near Liège. Belgium. German fighters were strafing Allied positions. At least one Bf-109 had been sighted circling like a bird of prey over a road full of American vehicles. Preddy and his wingman dropped out of altitude, diving down through the light, chasing the contact. They picked up a 109, silver twitch of motion against dark woods, and went after him. The German pilot saw the Mustangs and did the only thing that made sense. He ran. He dropped to the deck, putting treetops a few feet under his wing roots, using every contour of the land to break line of sight. Preddy matched him. Down, lower, faster. They slashed through a blanket of American anti-aircraft fire on the way. Every gunner on the front had been on high alert since dawn, told to expect German fighters coming low, trying to catch them while they were looking up. Now one such fighter, the 109, came streaking into their arcs. Right behind it, a blue-nosed P-51. From the ground, in the adrenaline and chaos, with seconds to decide, the picture wasn't what it really was. It looked like 2 enemy aircraft. The order went out. Fire. The Allied guns opened up. The 109, a second ahead, knifed through the barrage and survived. The Mustang, a second behind in the same corridor of space, didn't. 3 seconds of fire. 1 shell close enough in front of Cripes' mighty's nose to spray shrapnel back and through. Metal and glass turned into supersonic razors. Preddy was hit through the head and chest. Some witnesses remembered the Mustang flipping on its back and sliding into the ground. Others remembered it simply nosing over, the engine's song cut mid-note. In the end, the details hardly matter. He hit Belgian soil in a smear of snow, earth, and twisted aluminum. The Germans hadn't been able to touch him in 3 years of combat over 2 theaters. His own gunners had killed him in 3 seconds of tragic, understandable error. In the days after, men up and down the chain of command chewed on the awful taste of that fact. The flak crews who'd fired thought for a brief, hot instant that they'd bagged another German. Then the word came back with the wreckage teams. American plane, American pilot, Major Preddy. The 352nd Fighter Group lost its star. Not to a duel at altitude, not to some mythic Red Baron standoff over the Alps, to the inevitable chaos of a sky so crowded with machines and fear that no one could keep perfect track of what was where. In his service record, someone added one last line. Killed in action, 25 December 1944, near Liège, Belgium. His total claims, 26.83 aerial victories, depending on how you slice the fractions and ground kills. Of those, and 23 in P-51s, enough to make him the WWII highest-scoring Mustang ace in the European theater. The Navy doctor in 1940, looking at a slightly crooked spine and a blood pressure reading, couldn't have imagined those numbers. The Army doctor in Darwin, pulling 17 slivers of his own airplane out of his legs, probably wouldn't have bet on them either. Preddy wasn't around to care. He'd gotten exactly what every real fighter pilot knows. In the cold parts of their brain, is the best outcome they can expect. He burned brightly. He did his job. He died in his office. What came after? The stories, the books, the model kits, the YouTube videos is for the rest of us. There's a neatness people like to draw around aces. Numbers, scores, comparisons. Top this. Best that. Deadliest whatever. Preddy's story wrecks that neatness in useful ways. It reminds you that the best killers don't always look like recruiting posters. The system doesn't always recognize talent on the first pass. The war that shapes you can just as easily erase you by mistake as by design. If you stand back, there's another contrast worth sitting with. In 1940, men whose job it was to weigh risk told Preddy no 3 times. Too bent, too small, too fragile. In 1944, a commander whose job it was to weigh risk looked at the same man, drunk and spent from a bond party, and said, effectively, "You're still more useful up there than down here." Both were, in their ways, right and wrong. What makes this worth more than just trivia is what you and I can squeeze out of it now. Some kid watching this who's been told he's not shaped right for whatever dream he's carrying around might get to look at the scrappy little guy from Greensboro and think, maybe that's not the whole story. Some old guy who sat in a battery in the Ardennes, or in one of a dozen other free fire zones since, might see again how easily friend and enemy shapes can blur when you've got seconds to decide and years to regret. And someone who's always wondered how thin the line is between war hero and friendly fire statistic can see it drawn right here. 3 years of Germans trying and failing. 3 seconds of your own side's best effort being in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not a reason to romanticize war. It's a reason to be very, very careful who you let do your remembering for you. If you're still here, still seeing that blue-nosed Mustang hammering along a snow-covered valley with a 109 in front of it, an American flag above, you're part of the small group that refuses to let those lines flatten into a footnote. George Preddy's name is on a stone and in some books. For the people watching this, it's also now written in a moving picture. From a rejected kid with a crooked back, to a P-40 wreck in Australian Periphery War, to a bored Thunderbolt driver scanning empty German skies, to a Mustang ace rewriting the math on what one man could do in one airplane, to a crater in a Belgian field on Christmas Day. The Germans couldn't kill him. His own gunners did. And in between those two facts is the story worth telling.